Let's begin. The night was quiet but carried with it a subtle melancholy. On a lonely street, a gas station blinked with its red and blue neon lights. The lights, reflected on the asphalt wet from a constant drizzle, illuminated the surroundings. For many it was just an ordinary place, but for Emily that gas station meant survival. 7 months pregnant, Emily moved with determination between the pumps, cleaning windshields and checking oil levels. She wore a thin jacket and a worn work uniform that offered little protection against the cold, but she couldn't allow herself to think about that. The paycheck from that night was essential to cover another month's rent. Michaela, her 8-year-old daughter, sat in a plastic chair under the station's awning, sheltered from the drizzle. Her small fingers gripped a worn red pencil tightly as she drew carefully. Michaela was concentrated, filling the pages with drawings that seemed to have a deep meaning. While Emily worked, the low hum of a powerful engine resonated through the station. A black car stopped smoothly at one of the pumps. Inside was Daddy Yankee. His eyes scanned the surroundings and paused for a moment on Emily, observing the efficient way she cleaned windshields, maintaining a smile despite her evident fatigue. Then his attention focused on Michaela, absorbed in her drawing. Daddy Yankee, curious, observed the sketch. A simple but detailed scene of a kitchen with steaming pots and pans on a table. Intrigued, he asked softly, "Do you like to draw?" Michaela looked at him, surprised, but nodded shyly. "I draw places I want to go," she murmured. Daddy Yankee smiled. "And this place, what is it?" he asked, pointing at the drawing. Michaela hesitated, tightening her grip on her red pencil, as if deciding what to say. Before she could answer, Emily appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. "Michaela, are you bothering the gentleman?" she said with a polite smile. "She's not bothering me," Daddy Yankee replied calmly. "In fact, I was learning about her drawings and the places she wants to see." Emily gave him a look of curiosity and caution. But before she could respond, a car honked at another pump. "Excuse me," she said, and hurried to attend to the customer. Daddy Yankee stayed for a moment, watching as Emily returned to her work. Then he turned his attention back to Michaela and her unfinished sketch. Something in that moment felt bigger than he could comprehend. While Michaela added a few more details to the drawing, Daddy Yankee continued observing. He didn't know why, but that simple piece of paper seemed to carry a dream. Emily, meanwhile, finished cleaning the last windshield of the night. Her movements had slowed, the weight of her pregnancy pressing on her lower back, sending waves of pain with each step. She tried to mask her discomfort, but her face betrayed her exhaustion. When the last customer finally drove away, Emily leaned lightly against one of the pumps, trying to relieve the pressure on her back. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes briefly to contain the tears. It wasn't just the physical pain. It was the emotional weight of nights like these. From a distance, Daddy Yankee noticed. He watched as Emily adjusted her uniform and forced a smile before returning to the station counter. Michaela, sitting in her worn plastic chair, looked up from her sketchbook and noticed her mother's discomfort. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked softly. "I'm fine, honey," Emily replied, forcing a smile as she sat down next to her daughter. Daddy Yankee, seeing the hesitation in Emily's response, finally got out of the car. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Do you need help with anything? You seem tired." Emily looked at him, surprised, but her instinct was to deny it. "Thank you, but I'm fine, just a little back pain. It's normal with pregnancy." "Pregnancy shouldn't mean constant pain," Daddy Yankee responded calmly, his voice full of kindness. Emily shook her head and looked down at the ground. "There's not much to do. It's just part of life." Daddy Yankee didn't press further, but observed how she supported her lower back as she sat. "Do you do this every night?" he asked gently. Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "2 nights a week here, and in the mornings I clean offices. It's what pays the rent and keeps Michaela in school." Daddy Yankee remained silent, processing what he had just heard. "And when do you rest?" he asked softly. Emily let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Rest? I don't really have time for that. Bills don't wait, and with the baby coming I need to work even more." "There's no choice," she said, almost in a whisper. Emily looked at Daddy Yankee, her eyes reflecting weariness. "At least I made choices that brought me here. I can't complain." Complaining doesn't help, added Michaela, who had been listening silently. She handed her drawing to her mother. This is for me, she said, and Emily's expression softened, though tears welled up in her eyes. You're all that matters, Michaela. You're the reason I keep going, she responded, her voice breaking. Daddy Yankee observed the exchange, understanding that Emily not only carried the weight of her pregnancy and exhausting shifts, but also the emotional burden of ensuring Michaela's well-being. I wonder if I'm seeing her enough, Emily continued, her voice cracking. If someday she'll look back and think I only struggled but never lived, that I never gave her anything beautiful. Michaela squeezed her hand, saying, You give me everything, Mom. Emily smiled weakly, but a shadow passed over her face. Daddy Yankee, curious, asked. And her father? Emily froze for a moment before answering. He left when he found out I was pregnant again. Daddy Yankee felt a knot in his chest. It's hard enough with one child, he said. Emily paused, hesitant. He packed his things and left me with. She looked at her daughter sadly. The sound of a horn interrupted the conversation. Emily straightened her posture and turned to work. Excuse me, sir. Duty calls, she said. Daddy Yankee watched her as she walked away, noticing a slight limp in her right foot and the obvious weight of her pregnancy. His gaze shifted to Michaela, who was looking at her mother with concern. Your mom works a lot, Daddy Yankee commented. Michaela nodded, clutching the red pencil. She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep, she said. Daddy Yankee felt a pang in his chest. Why? He asked. Because she's tired, Michaela replied. And because Mom said Dad didn't want another mouth to feed. Daddy Yankee moved, looked at Emily and knew he had to do something. He stood next to Michaela, resolute. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew he had to act. The drizzle made the air colder. Emily adjusted her jacket, a shiver running through her shoulders. Michaela, sitting next to her, scribbled another drawing, but her gaze followed her mother. Daddy Yankee observed the interaction, captivated by the contrast between Michaela's innocence and Emily's exhaustion. However well she hid it. I'd like to ask you something, Daddy Yankee said, breaking the silence. Emily looked at him, surprised, but gestured for him to continue. If you could have just one thing to do differently, what would it be? Emily hesitated before answering. I don't know. There's no room to think like that anymore. What happens when you have bills to pay? Daddy Yankee nodded understandingly. You've had to give up a lot of things, he said. Give up isn't the word, Emily corrected. It's like. She paused. Life doesn't allow certain things. You can't dream when you're barely paying the rent. Michaela stood up, looked away from her drawing and looked at her mother. But Mom, you still cook, and you make the best lasagna in the world. Emily smiled softly, though sadly. Making lasagna at home and running a restaurant are two very different things, honey. You wanted a restaurant? Daddy Yankee asked, resuming the conversation. Emily was silent for a moment, then in a low voice replied, Yes. When I was younger, before all this, before I got married. Daddy Yankee noticed the change in her tone when mentioning her husband. Emily nodded, staring at the horizon. When we got married, we dreamed of opening a restaurant together. He always said I had a gift, that my love for food was special. But after Michaela was born, things changed. Everything became more difficult. And when I found out I was pregnant again, he left me. Michaela, listening silently, squeezed her mother's hand in a gesture of comfort. Emily swallowed before continuing. He couldn't bear another burden. He didn't want more responsibilities. And then he just left. Daddy Yankee felt a knot in his chest as he listened. Michaela continued drawing quietly while Emily tried to maintain her composure. Daddy Yankee, looking at Emily seriously, said, Maybe you feel like you have no options right now, but what if there was a way to change things? What if you had help? Emily frowned skeptically. I appreciate it, but I don't think so. I don't need charity. I'm not talking about charity, Daddy Yankee responded firmly. I'm talking about an opportunity. Something that could help you dream. Emily shook her head, fighting back her emotions. Why do you care? I'm nobody important. Because everyone deserves the chance to dream, Daddy Yankee said calmly. And you deserve more than just surviving. His tone became more resolute. I'm coming back tomorrow. Emily stared at him, unsure how to respond. Why? She asked. Because I think you deserve more, Daddy Yankee said, subtly pointing to Michaela's notebook. See you tomorrow. He then turned and walked away to his car. Emily stood still, speechless. She didn't know what to think or what to expect from the promise of his return the next day. When she finished her shift at the gas station and was organizing her things, she heard the familiar roar of a car engine. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. Michaela, who was at her side, stopped drawing and looked curiously towards the sound. Daddy Yankee parked his car next to the same pump as the night before, and with a calm smile, he got out with 2 large paper bags in his hands. He seemed relaxed but determined, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Good morning, he greeted as Emily approached, still cautious that he had actually returned. I told you, Daddy Yankee replied, placing the bags on the counter. He turned to Michaela. Good morning, Michaela. Good morning, Michaela exclaimed excitedly as her eyes widened at the bags, curious to know what was inside. Daddy Yankee noticed Emily's hesitation and calmly said, I just want you to see what's in here. He opened the bags, revealing new clothes for Michaela, and on top, a pristine box of colored pencils. Wow! Michaela exclaimed with joy, hugging the box as if it were a treasure. Thank you, sir, she said, hugging them against her chest. Emily watched her daughter's reaction, but her gaze lingered on the other items in the bags. She opened her mouth to speak, but Daddy Yankee interrupted her. I know what you're thinking, he said softly, but this isn't charity. It's just a little nudge to help. Emily shook her head, fighting back emotion. I don't know if I can accept this. Daddy Yankee placed an envelope on the counter, saying, This is just for this month. Then he pulled out a crumpled flyer and handed it to Emily. She took it and read the words on the flyer. Culinary course for single mothers. She blinked, confused. Is this a free cooking course? She asked. Daddy Yankee nodded. It covers professional techniques and even helps with the business side, in case you want to turn this into something bigger someday. Emily looked at the flyer, then at him, clearly struggling to process what was happening. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us, she asked, unable to understand. Daddy Yankee offered a small smile, his expression serious but kind. Because you deserve it. And because sometimes an act of kindness can change everything. Emily took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. I don't know what to say, she confessed. You don't need to say anything right now, Daddy Yankee replied. Just think about it. And know that someone believes in you. Michaela was still clinging to the pencils, looking at the flyer in her mother's hand. Mom, you'll learn new recipes like the ones Grandma used to make. Emily looked at her daughter and then at the flyer. For a moment, something seemed to stir within her. A small ray of hope, however faint. Emily held it, looked at the flyer, then at Michaela, and then back at Daddy Yankee, still hesitant, but with a new spark in her eyes. She whispered, Maybe it's time to try. She didn't know what Daddy Yankee had planned. What came next was even more transformative than she could imagine. Months passed since that morning she joined the cooking course. It not only refined her culinary skills, but also opened doors she never imagined. With each class, she rediscovered her passion for food, and more importantly, its power to bring people together. Daddy Yankee during that time worked silently on something bigger. While Emily learned, he gathered contacts, sought support, and found the perfect little space in the neighborhood. It was simple but cozy, the ideal place for what was to come. The special morning arrived. Emily and Michaela showed up at the location, not knowing what awaited them. There was Daddy Yankee with his calm and familiar smile, waiting by the entrance to the building. What is this? Emily asked as her eyes scanned the storefront. Daddy Yankee stepped aside, revealing a sign above the door. The elegant inscription read, The Golden Pot. Emily froze, surprise etched on her face. She brought a hand to her mouth, trying to contain her emotions as tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Michaela clung to her mother's arm, her eyes shining with excitement. It's your restaurant, Mom, Michaela exclaimed, pulling on her arm to lead her towards the door. Emily turned to Daddy Yankee, disbelief etched on her face. You did this? Why? Daddy Yankee smiled. Though his tone was serious, he said, Because you deserve it. Your story and your talent are special. and the world needs to see them. No one should have to give up on their dreams. They entered the restaurant together. It was small and simple, but it had everything Emily needed to get started. A functional kitchen, neatly arranged tables, and details that reminded her of her grandmother's restaurant. Michaela ran to a corner with a small table set up for children to draw, equipped with the pencils Daddy Yankee had given her months before. Emily ran her hands over the surfaces, still trying to absorb the reality of it all. She turned to Daddy Yankee, searching for the right words. "I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "It's small, but just make it grow. And do what you do best. Cook, bring people together, and pass this kindness on to others." The grand opening happened soon after, and the restaurant quickly became a cherished spot in the community. Emily crafted dishes that told stories, each one inspired by her grandmother's recipes, but with her own creative touch. The food was incredible, but what truly made the place special was the heart Emily poured into every detail. On the night of the grand opening, Michaela sat at a table, proudly handing out menus she had designed herself. Emily was in the kitchen preparing a lasagna while the restaurant buzzed with people. Laughter and conversations filled the air. Daddy Yankee watched it all from his car. When Emily brought him a lasagna, she said, "I never imagined I would be here," her voice full of gratitude. Daddy Yankee looked around. "But you deserve it. What you've created here is something everyone needs to experience." As Emily looked at the bustling restaurant, she realized that her dream had come back to life. But the true transformation wasn't just in her life. The ripple effect of that single act of kindness on her community was just beginning. The aroma of freshly prepared meals filled the air, enveloping the small restaurant in a warm embrace. "I could never have imagined this. Not a day goes by that I don't thank you for what you've done for me and Michaela. You changed everything." Daddy Yankee shook his head gently. "You changed everything. I just gave you a little push." Emily smiled back, but her expression turned serious. "I'll never forget what you've done for us, and I'll make sure to return the favor." Daddy Yankee nodded. "That's all I could ask for. Kindness is a cycle. It's time for me to go. Now you have the opportunity to be that change for someone else. This place is yours. It's time for you to continue writing this story." He gave her a warm smile before starting his car. Emily, deeply moved, watched as Daddy Yankee drove away, realizing that her life had been transformed.